It's just a wonderful tribute to the work that we're doing to have you all here. So on behalf of the staff and the board of the ICJS, welcome to our 25th anniversary celebration. I'm pinching myself to even fathom 25 years. Well, 25 years ago, a remarkable coalition of Christians and Jews, men and women, black and white, came together out of the conviction that neither our community nor our world can flourish in the midst of religious hostilities and dysfunctional rivalries. We simply must confront the pathologies of the past if we are to discover that our religious diversity is a blessing to celebrate and not an obstacle to overcome. We figured that it would take us about 3 years to raise the collective consciousness of our city, and then we would tidy up, clean up the mess of those 2,000 years of complex history. But it turned out the task of dismantling religious distortions that are deeply etched into our traditions is a more complicated task than we had imagined. We discovered that a great deal more is demanded of us if we are to reverse those habits of mind and heart that have pitted Jews, Christians, and Muslims against one another. Tonight, we want to take our breath and express our deep gratitude to all those who have embraced this daring educational vision and make certain that the mission is anchored on solid ground.
Be present at our table, Lord. Be here and everywhere adored. Thy creatures bless and grant that we may feast in paradise with thee. Amen.
How many of you attended some or all of the 9th National Workshop of Christians and Jews at the Sheraton Inner Harbor in May of 1986? How many of you were there for part of it? Well, we didn't know it at the time, but we were part of the experience that led to the birth of ICJS. The momentum and vibrancy generated in the planning and success of that event did not cease when the workshop was over. Following the workshop, there was a surging enthusiasm for ongoing interfaith cooperation. We were ready to develop an entity that could bring together Jews and Christians through study and encounter in pursuing a relationship that would benefit the whole community, expose us to each other's faith traditions, and in so doing, lead us to reflect openly on our own. Leaders in business, law, education, finance, the arts, and the religious community, women and men, believed we in the Baltimore area had the ingredients of interest, financial support, organizing skills, and commitment to make this work. And indeed, we did. You did. Of course, enthusiasm alone is never enough for something of this magnitude. Needed were people who could translate this vision into concrete, specific reality. Enter the birth of ICJS and the initial leadership of Charlie Obrecht, Rick Berndt, Bernie Manikin, and others, a Protestant, a Roman Catholic, and a Jew. Note that all three were laity, not clergy. And in that fact, I believe, is the genius that nurtured ICJS through its infancy and development. We began hoping, but not knowing, that ICJS would be more than a 2-year experiment. We searched nationally for the right person to be our executive director, and we found Chris Leighton right here in Baltimore on the Gilman School faculty. Chris was completing his doctoral work and was ready for a new venture. Now, 25 years later, we look back and marvel at his academic world, his depth of scholarship, his credibility with other scholars, a keen sense of what the Institute is and can become, clarity about interfaith issues, a winsome way with people, and a rare combination of patience and persistence, and through it all, a sustaining humility and a sense of humor. In the 25 years since 1987, the ICJS has touched literally thousands of people. In my years with ICJS, I have witnessed people moving through interfaith tolerance, beyond that to genuine mutual respect, beyond inhibiting suspicion to a really profound trust, beyond overlapping monologue to authentic dialogue where we both speak and listen. And in so doing, we learn and grow in wisdom in our respective faith traditions, and on the ground we share in common. We bring healing to a fractured world, tikkun olam. We do not gloss over our differences, but deal with those responsively and creatively. ICJS provides common ground that nurtures an environment for Christians and Jews to engage each other in studying our sacred texts and how they influence what we think and say and do every day. This evening is to recall and celebrate our past 25 years, but this is not so much a focus in a rearview mirror as it is a prologue to what lies ahead. We have proven ICJS can look ahead, and we have been doing that since the mid-1980s. We live, however, in a world where partially veiled prejudice and disrespect still exist, where seething rage and violence still are fueled by distorted, rigid religious ideologies. These are daunting challenges. Alone we may retreat from the formidable future, and many do just that. Yet tonight's celebration is testimony that there can be another way. Jeffrey Sachs closes his book, The End of Poverty, with this quote from a speech Robert Kennedy gave in Cape Town in 1966. Let no one be discouraged by the belief There is nothing one man or one woman can do against the enormous array of the world's ills. Few will have the greatness to bend history, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events. And in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation. Therein, I believe, lies the continuing spirit of the ICJS and our journey together. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. 25 years is a nice round number. It is a wonderful period. It's a substantial period. But let's not kid ourselves. In the deep pool into which we've jumped in this task, 25 years is nothing. We have been living in our lifetimes, most of us, since the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. Right after World War II, another great cataclysm, and the Dead Sea Scrolls and part of the ICJS's purpose has been facilitated by these documents that opened a window into the common birth of rabbinic Judaism and Christianity after the great cataclysm of the destruction of the temple in the Roman wars. And these documents produce a sense of awe and wonder about people struggling from all different perspectives with very fundamental questions about religion and about what binds us and separates us. The ICJS, therefore, is in a deep pool, and we have to be conscious of the fact that we're starting with personal belief, personal odysseys, but we're interacting with great swaths of history. It calls for courage, it calls for humility, it calls for a sense of where we are. In my own work, one of the most productive encounters that I had on these large subjects was in scholarship about Dr. King's good friend, Abraham Heschel. And I've told some of you these stories before, that Heschel told Dr. King that he believed that the prophets, the Hebrew prophets, provided the underpinnings for democratic faith, in that the doctrine of equal souls before God prefigured the notion of equal votes. That all our votes count together. And therefore, this religious yeast that takes root in times when our politics boil to the surface and in a creative period that goes forward is a good interaction between secular and religious philosophy, struggle, reaction. And Heschel's signature phrase was that awe is the beginning of wisdom. A sense of awe about how many faces are in this room, how many lives, how many stories, and what binds us all together, and how in rare moments of quiet you can realize that. That this intimate relationship between discovery and what binds us and the stubborn need to have some place that we can stand hold is part of what we're struggling with. We are blessed now. We don't know when the next great creative period is going to come in politics. We don't even know whether in the field of religion the largest stress is going to be between the enmities that we're still dealing with, that we recognize within the faith groups. It could also be, half the time when I talk to people about the mission of the ICJS, they say the problem is all religious people. And there the question is, are secularists and anti-religious people as aware also that without the same sense of awe, their pride doesn't need any religious enmity to create an awful lot of evil in the world? So we have to bear in mind how hard it is, what a tenuous state it is, to learn from one another, to realize that we're in great swaths of history on fundamental things, and we have a hard time reminding ourselves of the great leaps from tension that we can feel right here in this room. It hasn't been that long ago that people in this room were not comfortable even talking with one another. Never take that for granted. It's a really hard thing. It's like taking votes for granted, that we settle most disputes by votes rather than by swords and fires and rape and pillage and conquest. That's a wonderful thing, and we have moved that way. But underneath it all lies the sense of awe, the sense of wisdom, the sense of reaching out, the sense of being uncomfortable, of getting outside of your settled norms because you find awe there and it binds you together and it releases wonder and it releases energy and it releases doubt, but it's creative. So that at a certain point, you're not comfortable unless you're a little uncomfortable. And that's getting outside of yourself, and to me, that's what Heschel meant when he said awe is the beginning of wisdom. Because when you get out there and say there's more between us than we're aware of, we can learn it, but we're going to have to work hard at it, but you can't do it alone. You have to start alone, but you can't do it alone. You've got to be reaching out. And that's what ICJS has been doing, and in the great historical context, it has been a thrill for me to be a part of it, and it is a solemn, awesome admonition for me to say, keep doing it, keep reaching out. This is a historic and wonderful organization that has already felt resonance in history and has an opportunity to create a lot more. Thank you.
We were taught, or should have been, that one of the ways that God reveals God's self is through the other. Ira Stone captures the Jewish view very well. We cannot see the face of God and live, but we can see the face of our neighbor, which is an image of God's face in this world. The question is, who is the other? Who is our neighbor? Those who first suggested that human beings are the image of God in the world had a very narrow view of the other. Since their theologies would not accommodate the other, God's image in the world was severely restricted, and in most places on earth it still is. To see in the face of our neighbor, in every human being, an image of God's face in the world, does that image not also include our neighbor's faith? If it does, which I affirm, to love one's neighbor requires knowing our neighbor's faith. You can't know me if you have little awareness of Judaism and how my entire life is formed by that tradition. Nor can I know you if I know nothing about your faith. Without that knowledge, it's just love light, which may be okay for a beer, but not of particular interest to me, and it doesn't cut it in human relationships. Welcome to ICJS, which is an experiment in the study of sacred text, sharing our living faiths, discovering what we share in common, learning more about whom we are, and in the process learning to love one another. Because we can see in the face of the other an image of God's face in the world. We discover, too, what we cannot and do not share. The only way we can understand our theological bottom line, the only way to be firm in the boundaries of our own faith, is to test them. And the only way to test them is in a secure environment. That is hard to find. ICJS is such an environment for which I have and continue to be grateful. We love one another around ICJS, not love as an emotion, but love as motion. How we live with faith in this crazy, explosive world. Ours is a religious community, and I am privileged to be part of it, of all of you. Thank you.
Unlike the first creation, the creation of the Institute for Christian and Jewish Studies did not occur ex nihilo, out of nothing. While many direct factors contributed to its creation, I would suggest that perhaps the single greatest factor, albeit indirect, was the Second Vatican Council of the Roman Catholic Church. This past Thursday, October 11th, 2012, marked the 50th anniversary of the opening of this historic council. One cannot, I think, overestimate the radical and far-reaching sea change this gathering of the world's bishops had on the Church's self-understanding, on its relationship to the world, on Catholic identity, and indeed on the entire religious landscape. Since the Council of Trent some 400 years earlier, the Catholic Church's attitude toward and understanding of the world and its religions might most charitably be summed up as disdainful, suspicious, defensive, and hostile. The Church may have found itself in the world, but that was an unfortunate accident of history. It most assuredly wasn't of the world or for the world. Against this backdrop, the election of Angelo Giuseppe Roncalli on October 28, 1958, did not appear to be anything remarkable. Pope John XXIII, the name he chose, was elected as a compromise candidate. He was the only one that the progressive bishops and the traditionalists could agree on. But to everyone's astonishment, that same Spirit of God that hovered over the waters of that first creation chose to rest upon this good and holy man. 3 months into his pontificate, on January 25th, 1959, good Pope John, as he is so affectionately remembered by so many of us, gathered together a small group of cardinals for evening prayer at the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls in Rome to celebrate the conclusion of the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity. After Vespers, to that modest gathering of prelates, John announced his intention to convene an ecumenical council, a formal gathering of all the bishops of the Universal Church, what we have come to know as the Second Vatican Council, which met over 5 sessions from 1962 to 1965. One of the most important events to take place during the intervening years in preparation for the council occurred on June 13th, 1960. On that date, John XXIII met privately with the French Jewish historian and educator Jules Isaac, whose wife and daughter had been deported to Auschwitz in 1943 and executed in its gas chambers. Isaac had authored works on Jesus and Israel and on the origins of anti-Semitism. In preparation for his meeting with the Pope, Isaac had prepared a lengthy memorandum outlining the Church's centuries-old teaching of contempt for Judaism and the Jewish people. He presented it to the Pope with the hope that the upcoming council might provide an opportunity for the Church to carefully reconsider its relationship with the Jews. The last entry in Isaac's personal notes of that historic meeting read thus, and I quote, "To my request, the Pope responded immediately and enthusiastically, quote, "Since the beginning of our conversation," John said, "I also have had this thought." Isaac's notes conclude with this line. Again, I quote, "In telling him of all my gratitude for his welcome, I asked if I might carry away a bit of hope. And the Pope cried out to me, 'You have a right to more than hope.'" Historians of the Council recount that this visit between John the 23rd and Jules Isaac was the single most important catalyst in prompting John the 23rd to personally request the preparation of a draft document on the Jews for deliberation by the Council Fathers, the document that we know as Nostra Aetate, in our time, approved on October 28, 1965. In it, the Roman Catholic Church repudiates for all time, the charge of deicide it leveled against the Jewish people for 2 millennia, and denounces any interpretation of sacred scripture that presents a pejorative view of Judaism and the Jewish people. Henceforth, no Catholic who wishes to remain obedient to the magisterial teaching of the Roman Catholic Church may, under any circumstance, read, interpret, or quote the Bible to justify presenting the Jewish people as killers of Christ or as accursed and rejected by God. In one brief, dense paragraph, the Roman Catholic Church overturned 2,000 years of anti-Jewish teaching and preaching and ushered in an era of remarkable renewal. In 1985, I recollect, I had the privilege to travel to St. Louis with a small contingent of Jews and Christians who had been involved in Jewish-Christian dialogue for many years. We were there to attend the 8th National Workshop on Jewish-Christian Relations, and I remember all of us sitting at dinner one evening, discussing the events of the day. And I remember Charlie Obrecht, in his most modest fashion, saying, "Baltimore will host the next workshop. We can do so much better than this. We need to make unequivocally clear the imperative to educate Christians in the history of the Church's anti-Jewish teaching. We need to confront this legacy straight on, because the health and vitality of our religious communities of our city depended upon disarming religious hatred." And so we returned to Baltimore, and under Charlie's leadership, we began to plan the 9th National Workshop. And almost from its onset, I recollect, we came to realize that a conference alone could not create the kind of lasting change we knew we wanted to effect. That would take something more than a workshop, and so it happened. The creation of the Institute for Christian and Jewish Studies. From its inception, the dream of the ICJS was a noble one. 50 years ago, when John the 23rd announced the convening of the council, the image he used was of the church throwing open its windows and letting the fresh air of the world blow through. He called for an aggiornamento, a new day in which the church would come to understand itself not only as truly in the world, but identified with its hopes and its joys, its griefs and its anxieties, a statement captured in the opening paragraph of Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution on the church in the modern world. 25 years ago, the ICJS unlocked a few windows. We pushed them open, and we dared to let the fresh air of new scholarship blow through our hearts and our minds. In these intervening years, that fresh air has taken us to many places, the most exciting of which have been serendipitous. Now, 25 years later, I would like to think that in some small but significant way, the ICJS embodies the words John the 23rd spoke to Isaac in 1960. I would like to think that the Jewish community might look upon our work and say, "You have given us more than hope." Over the past quarter century, we have made a road by walking it, and we have been blessed to walk it with all of you. Now, in our time, we are being confronted by new questions and new challenges. How today does tolerance and hatred manifest itself in our religious communities? Who today are the objects of our religious ignorance and intolerance? The road which we have so carefully trod over these past 25 years is a road only in hindsight. Looking forward, there is still no blueprint. There are precious few models. Looking forward, there still is no road. The next generation of ICJS scholars and educators will do in their own time and in their own way what those of us who were there in the beginning did in our time, in our way. Make a road where there is none, built by women and men studying together, learning from and about one another, becoming friends. That is the fundamental work of the Institute, the creation of a safe space where ignorance gives way to knowledge and where knowledge gives way to hope. 25 years from now, when the ICJS gathers to celebrate its 50th anniversary, few of us, I suspect, will be sitting around these tables. Instead, we will be gathered around a different table, a heavenly banquet. We will lift our glasses high, and recalling that first creation account, we will look down upon our work, the work of the Institute, and together we will say, "It is very good." Thank you. And now I would like to call upon George Hess, who has a brief, unscheduled addition to our program.
No gathering of this sort would be complete without recognizing the person who took Charlie Obrecht's vision of studying the differences and the similarities between Christianity and Judaism, making them challenging, making them all for us to learn and able to follow up by saying we understand one another better. The Reverend Christopher Leighton, some 25 years ago, had a solid job at the Gilman School, and he left it. He left it to be the head of this organization that had a budget at that time of $50,000 for everything, including his salary. Let us all stand and give Chris a round of applause for a job well done.
At the ICJS, we've been blessed to do work that both changes the world and at the same time enables us to enjoy it. We know the urgency. We know that religious intolerance and the grip of ignorance must be broken, and that the virtue that may prove the most important for the ICJS is the virtue of endurance. The vice that most troubles and assails us is the vice of wishful thinking. But the ICJS would have nothing to celebrate had it not been for all the friends, all the folks who are here, who have given so much of themselves, and their generosity has enabled us to fly higher than anyone expected. And I don't know if there is another city that could have pulled it off with such aplomb. If there's justice in the world to come, you will have a ringside seat at the Messianic banquet where we will feast on Leviathan instead of chicken. What we get here and now, if we can get a glimpse behind the appearances, we get a glimpse of the kingdom of God and the glimmer of a grand possibility. We have a vital role to play in making real our best and noblest hopes. It's work that demands us to embrace the challenge, to change the world, and to enjoy and treasure one another every step along the way. So enjoy your dessert, and thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts for pouring so much of your heart, mind, and soul into the work that needs to be done and needs to be continued in the years to come.
Kivinu lo v'yoshiayenu ze Adonai kivinu lo nagila v'nismecha b'shuata Nagila v'nismecha b'shato. We will be glad and rejoice in his salvation.